Hello everybody, good morning. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I would like to start my presentation today thanking like the many people that make possible for me to be here after a long process that started in 2007 in Brazil. So I'm coming from Cuba, and the history that I'm going to make you today is the history that is shared by many countries, and especially islands and small island states in the tropical parts of the world, where the climate change and many things that are happening are making our life very different. No? So the title is here, Permaculture Use of Water in Times of Climate Change, the Cuban Experience. Thank you. And these are two very contrasting images. One is Salto Fino, the highest waterfall in the Caribbean, 125 meters tall. And this is one of the traces of the hurricanes that affects the Caribbean. In the case of Havana, which is one of the biggest, what we call sea penetration of the ocean in our city. So these are part of the same picture. No? Basically, a little bit of geographical context. You can see like some of the geographical feature of Cuba is an archipelago. The Tropic of Cancer goes just slightly between Cuba and Florida. And for many geographical determination, it was never considered like a dry place or an arid place. It's totally the contrary. It was considered a semi-humid or humid tropical systems. But as a big archipelago, like the marine ecosystems, including 9% of the mangroves of the planet, the coral reef, the second biggest barrier, and all the sun and sand systems is part of the feature. There is not a single place of Cuba that is more than 60 kilometers from the sea. So we are totally heavily influenced by the sea. Just to make a moment, no? Like the first contact with the Europeans, this is pretty much what covers 95% of Cuba. Climate forex, 35 different types, and this is the theory of population for the Arawak, different groups that have been present in the islands for more than for 7,000 years. And when at the arrival of the Spanish, the Neolithic agriculture in some points based on cassava that was producing 4 times of the yields of wheat in Spain. And it was without any doubt, Columbus didn't discover anything. There were people that were living there for a few thousand years before, and doing a sustainable use of the resources. The colonial period, 4 centuries, with these characteristics, like Cuba was like the main experiment for most of the plantations, agriculture, tobacco, coffee, sugar cane, and all this, the situation of the extermination of total Aboriginal population and all the slavery treaty and the problems with the Spanish fleets. And that period ended with 3 different wars of independence that for 30 years destroyed most of the countries. These are the very typical division of the Spanish when they arrived. The big circles were called atos, like for the big lords. For the cattle, there were the small circles. And only the little parts between the circles, it was considered the common or the crown land, the realengos. You can see around the Bay of Havana, there is any of these circles, because this was like the reserve for the so-called Invincible Armada. So many of the woods that are now in Escorial in Spain and many parts of Madrid and some of that were made in Cuban shipyards and with Cuban use. As a result of that, from this 95% that was at the arrivals of the Spanish, you can see how little was damaged by the 1800s, and you can see how it was totally decreased to a little bit more than half of the forest by the turn of the 20th centuries. And by 1959, there was only 14% left of the climax forest. Other maps from that time says only in 4 years around Havana and the 7 first villas of the Spanish on the big boom of the sugarcane expansion, how much like forests were totally wiped out of the country. There was a period of the post-colonial republic that for 60 years is not only about old cars, but that this plantation agriculture was totally expanded, and the concentration of the land happens in even less hands. Like a few American companies and 10 Cuban families were owning almost 80% of the total arable land. That brought total misery in the Cuban countryside. But we have to say, but this period, conventional agriculture didn't show up. And even, there was not even a job in the agriculture for Cubans, because it was mostly labor brought from Jamaica, from Cayman Island, from Haiti, from Dominican Republic. We have our Green Revolution. In this case, it was more in a socialist concept, where basically all of these monocrops expanded, and at some point we have like these Russian combine trucks that they make 2 kilometers on the liter of diesel, heavily soil compacted. That combined truck weighs 10 tons, that tractor 2 tons, 3 tons, and these are some of the impact for that so-called development that was based on the import of more than 30 million tons of fuel oil every year, of which agriculture was using more than 35%. So that party and crazy frenzy of use of resources totally finished on the 90s. And these were some of the features that Cuba had to face in the 90s, and started a totally different process of development, where we were basically facing a starvation. This is a very well-known story, you know, the power of communities, and like some presentation that we have been doing for the last few years. But basically, we would like to outline here, you know, some of the government measures that they were taking, of which, you know, urban agriculture, for example. I can tell you that 17% of the total arable land of Cuba is within the city limits, urban limits of Cuba. And I'm talking about more than 50,000 hectares, and it's an industry that employs 350,000 people. And the movement, what we call in Latin America, agroecology, or an agriculture that is not only organic as a market label, but low income, low energy, and socially fair, and in peace with nature, have been implemented in more than 3 million hectares. And this happens parallel to a major effort on reforestation and the protection of the environment. Tourism, decentralization, self-employment, and some the more typical methods were also employed. This is like the article of the Constitution of the Republic of Cuba that describes the relationship between like citizens, government, state, environment. It was changed in 1993 and reformed in the way that you see here. And the National Environmental Strategy of 2005 that is still on implementation in Cuba defined these environmental problems, not by priority. The land degradation, problems with the forestry coverage, and I will explain why it's not deforestation, the pollution, the loss of biodiversity, and these problems totally started to appear in Cuba. Lack of water. How is that possible? So some of the features for the land degradation, very, very similar to some of this is like the territorial perspective of that. in many, many countries, like data like means millions of hectares, the agricultural surface of the country, the cultivations, and some of the problems by erosion, high acidity, salinity, by sodium mostly compaction, by drainage, and this process, one or more of these processes affecting 60% of the territory. Yeah, right here, this is more like numbers. In terms of like the deforestation, as the history that I'm making to you, like 86% of the ecosystems were totally wiped out in the period by 1959. So that really give you an idea of the massive process of deforestation that the country suffered. But we can proudly say that in 50 years we're possible to revert the trends. And from that 14%, we achieved last year 27% of the total. That's 3 million hectares of forest. That's the size of Salvador, of the increase. It's a little country, but it gives you an idea. At least in Latin America, there's no country that is not reported massive index of deforestation. Anyway, it's not perfect. We have bad quality in the reforestation, low survival, sometimes less than 50%, low diversity, poor management. And, sometimes in the reforestation process, people think in cubic meters of wood. They don't think in plant or trees or forest workings. And of course, the main threats, the drought, the forest fires, invasive species, diseases. Just to give you an idea, right here in the forest surface, you see, by percentage, but how even in the worst moment of the Cuba as a country facing a food crisis, people practically starving, we were able to increase steadily the surface of forest. And it was a big effort, and we are very proud of it because nobody gave us a cent. No IMF, no World Bank, nobody. We just like doing the effort. So that's, in terms of pollution as environmental problem, of course, in the soil, in the water, in the atmosphere, these are some of the causes. The obsolete technology, it's a poor country. And the lack of financial resources, the sewage and the treatment, and also like all the link that the conventional treatment system have with money, with fossil fuels, with big machinery, that also determine that when like some of these process fails, it's very, very difficult to face the challenges. No matter what, this is like the reduction of the contaminant load in many areas, especially in the mountains, that is working very well, in the watersheds and in the bays. So that we have very particular type of bay we call back bays, that they're formed by rivers, and they have a very, very narrow entrance. In terms of biodiversity loss, very fragile ecosystems, and an island country with that diversity of landscape. Alexander von Humboldt, when he came to Cuba, he says that Cuba was a continent in miniature. So every 40 kilometers, everything, all the rocks, everything changed totally. And even it happens the same to like Soviet engineers, that they are used to the big continent when nothing happens, and they were totally surprised at that. And this, by the over-exploitation of the remaining forests and fisheries, that came like a very, very important degree of a loss of biodiversity. No matter what, we still happen to be, of course, the big center for biodiversity in the island Caribbean, and with a high level of endemism that is more than 50% by any group. These are some data for you. And of course, among those conditions, you can see, the mangroves and coastal ecosystems and wetlands is some of the most important features in Cuba, including the Zapata Swamp, which is the biggest wetland in the Caribbean. And here is some of the things that I would like to share with you, that just by the characteristic just of a mountain range to be totally perpendicular to the Alician winds, it gets like two totally different ecosystems. Our Cuban semi-desertic areas, that is like dwarf forests and with a lot of like cactus and succulent plants and differences. And in the other side, the little Cuban Amazons, the Jawani and Toa River. So it's all, you can see those two ecosystems in less than 40 kilometers just crossing the mountains, that the highest altitude there is 1,300 meters. That creates like very, very little space. One thing that was never recognized for Cuba and for the Caribbean was the existence of cloud forests. And it was not true. Like we have few mountains that are bigger than 1,500 meters, and there is cloud forest. We were there, we touched the plants and that. Unfortunately, most of the cloud forests that are in that limit, they are condemned by climate change to be disappearing, because like in the altitude with the change of temperature, all of these ecosystems are being wiping out. The best example to show that is Costa Rica, how the different mountains and ecosystems are disappearing there. And another thing that some people that talk about riparian vegetation and things like that, when the forest is there in rivers, there is not such a thing like a riparian vegetation. It's a continuum. And we saw that river grow 6 meters tall, and the water was never red or dirty. It was like pure water just running there. To support that and preserve this biodiversity, there is a proposal for the National System of Protected Areas, where we have like different, and right now it covers 22% of the national territory in this area. The goal is to cover 35% of the surface of the country, including several reserves of the biosphere, which are like the places when there is more interaction between like the human communities and the nature. In the case of Cuba, the decision was never made to kick out people from national parks, and there are almost 80,000 people living inside national parks in Cuba right now, because they were living there and they were living in a way that they keep the values of biodiversity, why they need to be kicked out. So in getting into the subject of the lack of water, and I know that when we compare these numbers with the people that live in the desert and extreme arid areas, that would be a paradise of water, no? But for the numbers that we are talking in the Caribbean, and with all the problems that have been increasing the conventional management of water, just to increase the capacity of holding water to by 9,600 millions of cubic meters in traditional reservoirs, that allows one amount of water that is considered a hydrical stress situation. But it totally disrupted the national hydrology network on the country. Well, we have like only two basins, one's in the north and one's in the south. There were rivers that they were very, very short in the length, and all of that really it changed forever. You know, the matrix of water in the country. So I can mention, you know, the droughts, the overuse, the variation of season, and of course that locally it changed a lot. Another thing that is very particular of Cuba, that it shares with other countries, but not in the Caribbean, because most of the Caribbean is a totally volcanic arc that have like a different formations, but Cuba have a very complex hydrogeology defined by karst. Karst is all the cavities formed by the 75% of the limestone rocks. So we have, in these caves, it's mostly of the aquifers, but these aquifers are on top of the salt water right away. So the interface is between the brackish water, the salt water, and the fresh water is very thin. In some places, it can be 45 centimeters. So that makes very risky earthworks, and everything is too close to the sea. And just sharing some of the ideas that when there was an attempt to build the subway in Havana, all of the big excavators fell, and they never found it, and they lost like millions of dollars for that. And of course, you know, we face also a lack of funding and lack of machinery resources to face that. So the response of that is like the watershed approach. And there are 10 hydro watersheds that are from national interest. Why? Because 40% of the population of the country live, and 60% of the economic activities of the country happens in those 10 watersheds. This is very important because right now most of the governments and most of the management of the water is based on the ecosystem approach of the watershed. So these are some of the hard data in case about water resources and the availability in terms of millions of cubic meters per year. In the top map, you will see that the resources, the water that can be used. But down is the availability of that water per inhabitant per year. And you can see like places that have like a lot of resources, the accumulation of population is so big that we are having like big problems in the big concentrations of population. This is like a distribution of the water per capita by the provinces of the country. So in red is like the main big problems, including the capital, Havana. And another big, very, very important thing that some people forgot to mention with this rush of climate change is that there is like normally the will to just try to get all the fresh water inland and try to avoid that no fresh water goes to the ocean. But basically, biologically speaking, means that less fresh water going to the shoreline, to the coastal. That means a drastic decrease of the production of the coastal ecosystems. And we have like 6,000 kilometers of coast, and you see people, and you can see the amount of fish and shrimp and the production that is every time that there is a big problem of drought. So this also affects totally the coastal ecosystems. That many of the approaches to that, they fail to make the connection between the coastal ecosystem. But in Cuba, since everything is so close, we have to make it because it's fairly visible. Apart from that, the climate change phenomenon, I believe in climate change, adds a threat to the sustainable development of Cuba and the Caribbean. These are some of the features, no? Like the threats to the forest, to the biodiversity, the frequency on the hydrometeorological events, the loss of like the agricultural productivity, the reduction of farming areas. This is like many countries are trying to predict that, though the thing is unpredictable. And the true thing that happens is that it's happening so much fast than any prediction, even the most like catastrophic predictions. In the case of Cuba, when you combine hurricanes like this with the vulnerability of coastal ecosystems like this, you will have a situation of extreme risk. Fortunately, we have a system of evacuation that works like a clock, and if you heard that one person dies in Cuba after a hurricane, is that something very, very, very bad happened there, because like the preservation of human life is the most important priority of that. In terms of hydrology, there are climate change impacts that are very clear in the Caribbean. Less fresh water available. This is like, it's raining less water. That's a fact. Is quantified. But also in the seasonal variation of that is that almost all the annual rainfall is falling in 2 months. Before we have a dry season, and then we have a wet season. And in the wet season of 6 months, it rains 95% of the water, and in the dry season, only 5%. Now, we have this, like in fewer months, in 3 months, we will have most like 80% of the historical 85%. And then we will have this very, very uncommon things, is dry, wet seasons, because the dry season, then 5 hurricanes will bring in 1 hour the annual rainfall of one of the countries represented here. And then we have, the wet season is totally dry. it's totally, so these, they're not really seasons anymore. And this also caused like big flash floods that really, really damage and increase all the problems of the erosions. It's true, also a true fact that it's more and stronger hurricanes. When hurricanes is something called Force 5 that is affecting the Caribbean because the waters of the Caribbean Sea are boiling all the time. And this is the perfect factory for these hurricanes. And of course, the degree of evaporation and saline intrusion, it will be increasing. This is something that is happening. This is nothing that is saying, no, it's going to happen in 25 years, and because there is a lot of like prediction that they're talking about the increasing of the sea level. This is happening today. And you have an extreme at Haiti, you know, like that, the level of like the degradation of the environment, it's like extreme, and some other places when this can be different, no? So what mostly government does, this is the answer of the governments, and the Cuban government with the political will and the available resources is implementing many of these policies, you know. First, more conventional solutions, you know, more dams, more pumping stations, more canals to bring water from here to there, more aqueducts, more reservoir, more disrupting of the natural system. With very limited factor because you are just exporting the problem from here to there. And that is like making the problem worse. The watershed ecosystem approach, of course, is something that is like bringing like new things on, new topics on that. A lot of people talk about that, United Nations, you know, Ramsar conventions. Then the drought and land degradation and desertification, they're put on the main environmental problems in the national strategies. We see that. We see the United Nations Convention Against Desertification and Drought. And there are more sustainable land management, anti-desertification programs. Of course, it's necessary campaigns to raising awareness and water saving. You know, stop the watering. In some places, you know, you cannot irrigate your plants 2 days a week, you cannot wash your cars, all of those things. When you see the matrix of global impacts of the threats, these are floods, like 37%, but the hurricane and tornadoes, 28%, the drought and the extreme temperature, you will see that this matrix is totally changing, and in more than 60% will be depending on the water. Even if you take the example of the accident in Fukushima, you will see how the water to cool the system will play a key role on that, and how that management really brought more problems. What happens specifically in Cuba? When you see, this is the average annual rainfall, normally for many years, and you can see that it's a lot of water that is supposed to rain by different areas. And when you analyze the aridity per year, it says that there are only like a few places that are considered arid or semi-arid. But what happens in reality is this: drought, extreme erosion, deforestation, salinity in the local level. So even when geographically that couldn't be happening because there is some water actually like falling in the country, we have a local different perspective. Of course that there are some more actions taken, like this is the Cauto River is the main watershed of the country, the biggest one that I take in. And in Cuba, it's very important also the water social justice. It's a poor country, but even using conventional methods and with very little money, we can see that the supplies covers more than 95%, the sanitation is more than 95%, the black water treated is 40%, and there are national problems of that. These are first world numbers, and it tends to people when you see that in UN, especially this is the sector, urban and rural, served population, connections, public service, that, okay, there is no problem, you know. But the thing is, like, the conventional management has its limits, and it cannot respond to the problems that are facing. So the same for the sanitation coverage is very good numbers. for the poor country of the third world. And of course, Cuba signed in 1994 and ratified the United Nations Conventions against desertification and drought. There is a national group against desertification. It was created in 1995 and started with 24 institutions. And since 2002, we have a national program against desertification and drought that is being working. And you know, part of that program is try to convince people that there is no a single drought, that there are several kinds of drought. The meteorological drought is like when it rains less than is supposed. The agricultural drought that is necessary totally to stop some agricultural activities that use a lot of water. The hydrological drought, and then you have the social and economical drought. But it's very hard to convince people that this is happening, no? And here we go to what permaculture people do in Cuba, no? In the first place, we have to assume that our agriculture not only be low energy, chemical free, low income, and socially fair, it needs to be low water and resilient to climate change. So we are trying to use alternative solutions, and especially our main goal is to reduce the evaporation rates on the agriculture. We see the forests as factories of water. I know that this is a very old argument between geographers that says, okay, it rains because it rains, geographical reasons, so the nature doesn't have a role on that. That's totally false. You know, there are many demonstrated relations on that. And in our ecosystems, you know, the forests and other natural ecosystems, they play a key role on that. The appropriate technology, we're not talking about microchips that apply one drop of water every 5 minutes or anything like that, and I will be showing. The integrate coastal zone management zone with the agriculture, because they have been divided for too many years. And if climate changes, the permits have to change and adapt. So that means that the water management needs to change. Of course, I won't be preaching to the converted here describing the principle of permaculture. There are many people that can do that a lot better than me. But we always apply creatively those principles according to the local. And one thing that we really have learned is that we cannot work alone. We need to make alliances and synergy with like big ton of existing programs. So in terms of what is sustainable management, some people use that term, the use of blue water, and try to increase, that is the water that is normally in the ecosystems. But we also talk about the green water, the water that is exactly stored in the forest. So this is like the goal to increase this productivity. But when we talk about productivity, it's productivity for us and for the planet and for the ecosystem. It's not only like products. And in practice, that's, you know, very well known for you, rainwater collection, the use of gray water, aquaculture and aquaponics, thinking that fish and shrimp don't drink. Constructed wetlands for the purification of food forests and tree-based systems, renewable energy-based water systems, low water resilient agricultural practices. Try to bring the water management to a human and a natural scale, because all that we see is the Three Gorges, the Chinese building the biggest reservoir, and it was necessary to move that many kilometers of land to supply water to Mexico City. So it's all about that. It's like, the treatment to the water is such a big scale that it's not human and it's not natural anymore. And that avoids people to grasp like how the water works in the nature. And of course, try to close the water cycle in smaller spaces as much as possible. So right here, there is some of the photos like of things that 37% of the consumption of clean water in conventional things is to flush toilets. So we have been right now implementing different systems. So we have in 5 of the 15 provinces of Cuba, there are like compost dry toilets of different technologies working, and it's just people just building and applying and doing it. The water collection system, this is something that the Arabs taught to the Spanish, And the Spanish taught us is like how to collect the water from the roof and in the big clay pots. That's the very, very traditional systems, or all the systems from the rainwater collection. So we have in there dozens of rainwater systems allowed, because we think that without that it was not possible to face all the production that the city was sustaining. And in terms of the filters for the black and the gray waters, different technologies are applied with different, in tropical ecosystem, we have a wide range of plants that we can use and even increase the production. And this is what we call appropriate technology. That's the typical Roman hydraulic ram. With 1 meter of waterfall, you can push the water more than 5-6 meters. This is the mecate, like it's a very, very simple system, and the very typical hand pumps. We are talking what is appropriate. It's not talking about high tech and different things. Biodigesters, the windmills, more ramps, and even systems that are very simple with using bicycles and human power to provide water in the city. If you ask me, that's not poverty, that's common sense. But we are being told that that's poverty, that the true thing is to have an aqueduct and this and that, and the big waste of water. In the case of the water management practice, we came with a matrix of like different measures that can be applied in permaculture to face hurricanes or severe drought. That this is like a country of extremes. We have no water, or we have a big ton of water to divert in the season. So we identified 24 subsystems regarding soils, different production, storing, protection, and supporting of like affected people. And that means, you know, beekeeping, cattle, and like different things. In the case of like a place like Havana, no? This is the Amman River. It's one of the main environmental problems of the city. And with conventional method, people talk that they need $148 million, like just to fix the problems of this river that is heavily polluted. You can see here the watershed. That's the Bay of Havana. That includes like some big reservoirs. But as always, you know, the necessary water for the nature is never supplied. No flush, no possibilities on that. And as a result of that, you see coexisting some agricultural systems with like heavily polluted water, abandoned factories, some of them there for 200 years ago. And at the same time, there is a green park system along the watershed, the zoo, the botanical garden. These are spaces with more than 700 hectares each one. And the Metropolitan Park of Havana is right in the area. So in that area, we have been facing and trying to push for the construction of like constructed wetlands. That there is the big nightmare of the urban planners. They take too much space. They create problems. There are mosquitoes there and things like that. So I'm going to share. This one has been working for 6 years perfectly. And it's serving 60,000 people with no problem. This one in Palatino, it used a very different system that it concentrated the water there. And you can see right here how it works perfectly. No problem, no mosquitoes, a lot of like dwarf guavas producing, kids playing there. And there is some what is called hybrid solutions, because sometimes you don't have the space, but you can put like a more conventional system combining with like natural plants working on it. And you can see here little mandala systems working there. These have been working for 4 years. You have one person there, no problem. They just have to control the system. And we are trying, you know how much we spend on that? 100,000. So I say, if you have like a big number of these systems, you don't need that $148 million to do that. It's possible to do. The technology is there. It's nothing that complicated. These are some of the challenges that we're facing regarding water, you know, and it's things that like the water as the limiting factor for the food production. The conventional managed totally despise and misuse the water. There is pressure to produce more food at short term because of the food prices, market, because it's necessary, because of population. And also there always, the big hope in the big water micro projects to bring the water from the rainforest in the east to the areas of Holguin that are damaged by. So there always this big hope. If somebody give us money, we will have this. The need for water resilient food systems, some of the systems in the tropical, that's the thing that we are, in our mind, in our tradition, we don't consider ourselves that we live in an arid place. So we are in the tropics. We have bananas. We have cassava. We have annual rainfall of 3,000 millimeters. Okay. I don't know what happened here. Okay. But the reality is very different. And people doesn't have the tradition, doesn't have the tools to do that. So it's very, very, very important to show to people. And of course, the climate change impacts are happening and they are increasing day by day, year by year. And it's necessary for the development of the country. And we have to face some like investment projects that they are threatening the water hydrology, mining, especially in Cuba, nickel, chromium, iron, manganesium, oil drilling in the deep waters of Mexico, Mexican Gulf. And still there are many of these activities that are disturbing. That's some of the challenges. I want to share here an example of a typical Cuban permaculture site management. Around that place you will see that there is nothing growing, but how this family achieved to have that in a place that is totally like damaged. Basically, the division on that's it was very tiny little creek that was transformed in a system with the use of the water. He was lucky that he was able to use this, and that is the little creek when it was there, and then it becomes like this. But then he have a well that sometimes is covered, sometimes it's not, and this is like the water that comes out of the dam. Basically, when the reservoir dries, what they basically do, this is our Cuban tractors, the oxen. And all that area first is the only place where there is some pasture until the last minute. And even when that stops, they can get all of these nutrients to fertility, to add the fertility of the soil. What is this doing? Oh, come on. And these are some, it was not cleaning machines. They did it totally by hand. And different systems, the wells, everything was done by hand and what people did it. Some of the lessons that we learned regarding to water in Cuba. First, agriculture is a thirsty business. That's true, It's something that we have to accept. When there is no water, people blame agriculture. Oh, come on. I don't know what's happening. Most of the real energy producing potential at the micro mining level, I'm not talking about big projects, is totally neglected. Just by water that comes from here to here, there is energy potential that can be used. There are not magical solutions. We cannot promise people, no, we are going to transform the system in that. It's necessary to work hard, it's necessary to learn, and things in nature takes time. The forests and natural ecosystems are a lot more efficient than reservoirs, but we have to convince people of that, and sometimes it's very, very hard. And that dignity and social justice, it was not enough, because it's necessary a new paradigm towards water, totally necessary, because even when you try to share the resources and things like that, it's necessary totally to change what is being done since the Roman times. The same, bring water, aqueduct, unstripe the water from this and bring it to the big city. And of course, and this will be completed during this day, that permaculture has a lot to say in terms of water. This is Creole is the term that the sons of the Spanish, when they were born in Cuba, they were called Creole, and they considered themselves Cubans, even in the first generations. No? So We call our permaculture Creole permaculture. And we try to find these different principles. There are some opportunities right now in Cuba. A new land reform that is giving for free more than 150,000 hectares, units of 13 hectares. That means that we have new farmers, we can have potentially more permits, existing programs and converging initiatives. This is very important. If we don't make the permaculture presence in the existing programs, we will missing a lot of opportunities. There are food sovereignty, climate change, coastal ecosystem, forest reforestation, desertification and drought, sustainable development. There are a lot of things going there. And unfortunately, the permaculture is not present there. We need to go there and take advantage of these opportunities. And another opportunity is that the conventional system, they cannot respond to the challenges. Even if they don't recognize, it's clear that they are totally collapsed by what is happening, by the increase of population, by corporate interests. And as our leader magazine says, it's possible. We can do it, no? And this is that typical organic operation in Cuba. I want to finish right here. More than permaculture, the system of more than 20 years of the new system of agriculture prove this system, and also prove that it's possible to do with a relatively small amount of water. And of course, permaculture, we all know it, but sometimes it's necessary to remark, because we need to educate people that it's necessary to make peace with water and stop struggling against the water. And in 2006, there was that report by WWF about the sustainable development, whatever it is. I prefer to think that sustainable development is like that. Nice water, nice future, nice people, and the best with our tradition. And let's take an imaginary trip that we're leaving Cuba. You can see there, this is a bay that has 5 manatees. And the way that we're coming here, I would like to finish right here. Thank you for your time.